The ammunition feed had jammed 3 shells back when the world became fire. I remember my hands on the loading mechanism, the familiar resistance of a stuck casing, Corporal Hendricks shouting coordinates from the targeting station, and then nothing but pressure and light, and a sound that was not a sound but a presence that crushed through my skull and kept crushing until I woke up on the floor of the fighting compartment with Bradley's intestines draped across my chest like warm rope. The first thing I processed was not the screaming. There was no screaming. That came later, in the silence between heartbeats, when I realized the absence of 19 voices meant something I could not yet comprehend. What I processed first was the taste of copper and promethium fuel, thick as syrup on my tongue, and the way my left arm would not respond when I tried to push Bradley's guts off my chest. The nerves were dead from shoulder to fingertip. I learned later that the shrapnel had severed something essential, but in that first moment I simply thought my arm had fallen asleep, a minor inconvenience. I would shake it awake and return to loading shells, and we would win this engagement, and Sergeant Whitfield would make his usual joke about ammunition expenditure, and I would pretend to laugh the way I always did. Then I saw Hendricks. His head had rotated 180 degrees on his neck, not torn off, rotated. The spinal column had twisted like wet cloth and left his face pointing backward at me, eyes still open, mouth still shaped around that final coordinate he never finished calling. I stared at that impossible geometry for what felt like hours. His head should not have been able to do that. The human body had rules. Hendricks had violated them. I did not scream. I want to be clear about that. There is a myth that people scream when confronted with horror, that some primal instinct tears sound from the throat, but real horror is silent. Real horror steals your voice. Because your brain cannot process what your eyes report, and so the connection between thought and expression simply shuts down. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out except the taste of Bradley's blood where it had splashed across my face. The fire started in the engine compartment. I could hear it before I could see it. A rushing sound, like wind through a tunnel, except the tunnel was the ventilation system, and the wind was superheated air carrying the first molecules of burning promethium toward the fighting positions. The auxiliary lighting had failed. Emergency lumens flickered red in 3-second intervals, painting the interior of the tank in strobing crimson that made the dead look like they were still moving. Every flash showed me another face. Carlson slumped over the secondary weapons console. Nguyen crumpled beneath the commander's cupola with his legs at angles that did not correspond to joint placement. Morrison and Chen tangled together near the forward observation port, their bodies fused by whatever had burned through the armor at that position. The port itself was a hole now. Molten metal had sealed it shut after punching through, creating a plug of slag that glowed dull orange in the darkness. 19 crew operated a super-heavy battle tank of this classification. I had loaded shells beside these men for 8 months. I knew their names, I knew their superstitions. I knew which ones prayed to the Emperor before engagement and which ones had stopped believing. Morrison always touched the left wall 7 times. Chen muttered his wife's name under his breath during bombardments. Nguyen kept a picture of his daughter hidden in his boot, where the commissar could not find it and confiscate it for emotional compromise. The picture was probably still there, in the boot, on the leg, bent at an angle that would have made Nguyen scream if he had still been alive to feel it. I pushed myself upright with my one functional arm. The floor tilted at, perhaps, 15 degrees. The tank had come to rest at an angle, which meant the tracks had been destroyed, or the terrain had shifted beneath us, or both. Through the ringing in my ears I could hear external sounds, explosions, artillery, the deep bass thrum of void shields somewhere in the distance. The battle was still happening. We had simply stopped being part of it. The smell hit me then. I had smelled burning flesh before. Every guardsman who survives long enough smells burning flesh. It becomes background noise, a constant presence on any battlefield where lasfire and promethium are deployed. But this was different. This was close. This was concentrated. The ventilation system was pulling smoke from the engine compartment forward into the fighting positions, and that smoke carried with it the rendered fat and vaporized tissue of whoever had been stationed near the rear. Engineers. The men who kept the ancient engine spirit appeased. I did not know their names as well. They worked in their own section, separated from the gunners and loaders by bulkheads and tradition. Now they were smoke. Now I was breathing them. I vomited across Hendrik's backward-facing corpse. There was nothing in my stomach except bile and the ration bar I had eaten 6 hours ago, before the engagement began, when I still believed I would eat another ration bar 6 hours from now. The emergency beacon was my first thought. Every tank carried one. Standard Imperial Guard equipment, mounted near the commander's station, designed to broadcast location data to recovery crews after a vehicle was disabled. If I could reach it, if I could activate it, someone would come. Recovery teams operated during lulls in combat. They would find us. They would cut through the armor. They would pull me out. I started crawling toward the commander's station. Bradley's intestines slithered off my chest as I moved, leaving a wet trail across my uniform. I did not look at Bradley's face. I could not look at Bradley's face. He had been telling a joke when the shell hit, something about a commissar and a grox. I never heard the punchline. Now I would never hear it, and I could not look at his face because I knew his mouth would still be shaped around whatever word he had been speaking when the shrapnel opened his abdomen and let his organs fall out. The deck plating was slick with fluids I chose not to identify. Some of it was oil from ruptured hydraulic lines. Some of it was blood. Some of it was other things, things that belonged inside bodies and not pooled on metal floors. My functional hand found purchase on a support strut, and I pulled myself forward over Morrison's fused corpse, around the tangled mess of power cables that had torn loose from the ceiling. The emergency lumens kept strobing, red, dark, red, dark, red, dark. Each flash showed me something new, a hand here, a boot there, something that might have been a face but had lost too much structure to be certain. The heat was increasing, not dramatically, not yet, but I could feel the temperature rising by degrees, the air growing thicker, the metal surfaces warming beneath my palm. The fire in the engine compartment had not yet breached the bulkheads, but it was working on them. Super heavy tanks were designed to resist external attacks. They were not designed to burn from within. Given enough time, enough heat, the internal seals would fail, the promethium reserves would ignite, and I would become another component of the smoke that was already filling the forward compartments. I reached the commander's station. Sergeant Whitfield was not dead. His eyes opened when my hand touched his leg. I jerked back, startled, and in the red flash of the emergency lumens I saw his face twist into something that might have been recognition. His mouth moved. Sound came out. Words, maybe. I could not hear them over the ringing in my ears and the rush of fire in the ventilation. I pulled myself closer. Whitfield's lower body was pinned. Beneath the targeting cogitator, which had torn loose from its mounting and crushed everything below his waist. Blood pooled around him in a spreading lake. Too much blood. The kind of volume that meant he had minutes, not hours, maybe not even minutes. His mouth moved again. This time I pressed my ear close enough to catch the whisper. "Beacon's dead," he said. "Tried. Nothing." My stomach dropped through the floor of the tank and kept falling. The beacon was dead. The one piece of equipment that could save me, the one connection to the outside world, had been destroyed in whatever hit us. "What happened?" I asked. My voice sounded wrong. Too high, too thin, like someone else was speaking through my throat. Whitfield's eyes drifted toward the ceiling. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Lances," he said, "orbital. Our shields dropped and they hit us with lances, orbital strikes. We had been killed by our own fleet. Somewhere above this battlefield, in the cold void between worlds, an Imperial warship had targeted a concentration of enemy armor and had not waited for confirmation that our position had been updated on the tactical cogitators. Friendly fire. The kind of accident that happened in war, that officers apologized for in briefings while families received standardized condolence letters explaining that their sons had died in service to the Emperor. Except I was not dead. Not yet. "The emergency vox," I said. "Can you reach the emergency vox?" Whitfield's hand moved, slowly, painfully. His fingers found my wrist and squeezed with strength that surprised me given how much blood he had lost. "Boy," he said, I can't reach anything below my chest. I can't feel anything below my chest, and in about 5 minutes I'm going to close my eyes and not open them again." He coughed. "More blood. So you're going to need to do this yourself." He was right. I knew he was right. The emergency Vox unit was mounted on the far side of the commander's station, accessible only from a standing position or a very creative interpretation of crawling. Whitfield could not reach it. I would have to climb over him, navigate the wreckage, and hope the unit was still functional despite everything else that had been destroyed. I started climbing. Whitfield did not make a sound as I braced myself against his crushed legs. I tried not to think about what was happening beneath that targeting cogitator, what kind of damage I was potentially making worse by using his body as leverage. He was dying anyway. We both knew it. Every second I spent being gentle was a second the fire burned closer. The Vox unit hung from a single cable, its housing cracked but intact. I grabbed it with my functional hand and pulled it toward my face. Static hissed from the speaker. That was good. Static meant power. Static meant the transmitter might still work even if the receiver was damaged. I pressed the transmit key. "This is Loader 3rd Class Fitzgerald of the 7th Armored Super Heavy Designation Hammer of Retribution. We have been hit. Request immediate recovery. Multiple casualties. Fire in progress. Repeat, fire in progress." I released the key. Static. Nothing but static. I pressed it again. "This is anyone. Is anyone receiving? We are trapped. We need extraction. Please respond." Static. Crackling. The distant ghost of voices that might have been other transmissions or might have been my imagination. "The bombardment," Whitfield whispered. "They'll be jamming. Standard doctrine during orbital support. Of course they would be jamming. Why would anyone need to communicate during a battle? Why would survival matter when there were tactical objectives to achieve?" I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob, and I bit down on it before it could escape completely. Sobbing would not help. Sobbing would waste oxygen. The fire was eating our air, and I needed every breath I could get. I kept transmitting, every 30 seconds, the same message, the same coordinates, the same desperate plea for someone to hear and respond. No one did. The static continued unbroken, a white noise wall between me and the rest of the war. Below me, Whitfield's breathing changed, the wet rattle of lungs filling with blood, the slowing rhythm of a heart that had lost too much to keep pumping. I looked down at him between transmissions and watched the life drain from his eyes in increments. "There's water," he said. His voice was barely a whisper now. "Emergency stores, under the tertiary gunner's seat. Sealed canteens. You're going to need them." "You're going to need them too," I said, because I did not know what else to say. Whitfield smiled. Blood painted his teeth. "Boy, I'm going to be dead in 2 minutes, maybe less. And you're going to be stuck in here for a long time, so listen to me. Water, canteens, under the seat. And there's a fire suppression kit near the engine bulkhead. Chemical retardant. It won't stop the fire, but it might slow it down, buy you time." "Time for what?" His eyes found mine. In the strobing red light I could see the certainty in them, the absolute knowledge of a man who had accepted his death and was now focused entirely on ensuring someone else survived. Time for them to stop jamming. Time for your transmissions to get through. Time for recovery crews to reach this position. He coughed again. Less blood this time. He was running out. "You're going to make it, Fitzgerald. You're going to survive this. That's an order." "Sergeant, I don't think orders work when you're dying." "Then consider it a request, from one dead man to another." He stopped breathing 3 minutes later. I sat there with the Vox in my hand, watching his chest fail to rise, waiting for him to cough or twitch or give any sign that he was still present in his body. Nothing. The blood stopped spreading because there was no pressure behind it anymore. His eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling, seeing whatever the dead see when the Emperor calls them home. I closed his eyes. It seemed like something I should do, something decent. Then I went looking for the water canteens because Whitfield had ordered me to survive and I had never disobeyed a direct order. The tertiary gunner's seat was occupied by what remained of Private Marcus Webb. He had been assigned to our crew 2 weeks ago, transferred from a light infantry unit after showing aptitude for mechanical systems. Young, maybe 19 standard, He had not talked much, but when he did it was usually about his mother back on some agri-world I had never heard of, how she raised groks, how he missed the smell of clean air and growing things. Now he was slumped in his seat with his skull opened like a flower, brain matter spattered across the targeting display behind him. I tried not to look at his face as I searched beneath the seat. The canteens were there, 3 of them, sealed, heavy with liquid. I tucked them into my belt, grateful that I still had one functional hand to carry things. The other arm hung useless at my side, a dead weight of meat and bone that had stopped being part of me. The heat had increased noticeably. I could feel it through my boots now, radiating up through the deck plating. The fire was spreading. The bulkheads between the engine compartment and the fighting positions were designed to contain heat for a limited time, but that time had limits. 20 minutes, maybe 30. After that, the seals would begin to fail, and the fire would pour through like water through a cracked dam. The fire suppression kit. Whitfield had mentioned it. Near the engine bulkhead. I started crawling again. The layout of a super-heavy tank is not designed for human comfort. It is designed for war. Every square meter serves a purpose. Every surface holds equipment or weapons or ammunition or the bodies of the men who operate them. Navigating from the commander's station to the engine bulkhead meant crossing through the main fighting compartment, past the ammunition storage lockers, past the secondary gunner positions, past the bodies of 11 more crew members whose names I knew, but whose faces I could no longer recognize because of what the orbital strike had done to them. Chen, Morrison, Carlson, Hendricks. The brothers Vasquez, who had joined together and now lay together in a tangle of limbs that made it impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Gunner First Class Patterson, who had survived 3 campaigns and 4 commendations and now stared at nothing through eyes that had boiled in their sockets from the heat of the impact. Loading Assistant Cooper, 19 years old, who had shown me a picture of his girlfriend the night before and asked if I thought she would wait for him. She would not have to wait long now. I found the fire suppression kit bolted to the bulkhead exactly where Whitfield had said it would be. Standard Imperial Guard issue, chemical retardant in pressurized canisters, designed to smother promethium fires through oxygen deprivation. The kit was intact, the canisters were full. Something had finally gone right. The bulkhead was hot to the touch. I could feel it through my gloves when I pressed my palm against it. Not hot enough to burn. Not yet. But warming. The metal expanding slightly as the temperature rose. Behind that wall, the engine compartment was becoming a furnace. The fuel reserves, the sacred machinery that powered the treads and weapons, the bodies of the engineers who had tended it, all of it burning. I activated the first canister and directed the spray at the base of the bulkhead, where the seals would fail first. White chemical foam hissed against the metal, spreading in thick layers that solidified on contact. The heat might melt through it eventually, but eventually was better than now. Every minute mattered. Every hour was another chance for the jamming to stop, for my transmissions to reach recovery crews, for someone to come. I used 2 canisters on the bulkhead. I saved the third. I did not know how long I would be here. The smoke was getting thicker. The ventilation system continued to pull contaminated air forward, and now that the fire was closer, the smoke carried more than just the smell of burning flesh. Chemical compounds, plastics, lubricants, things that probably should not be inhaled, but which I had no choice but to breathe, because there was nowhere else for the air to come from. I found a cloth in one of the emergency kits and tied it over my nose and mouth. It would not filter everything, but it would help. Maybe. Probably not. I was going to die of smoke inhalation before the fire even reached me. That seemed obvious now. But I kept transmitting anyway because Whitfield had ordered me to survive, and because I did not know what else to do. Time began to lose meaning. In a tank, trapped underground by debris or sealed in by damage, there are no external cues for the passage of hours, no sun, no stars, no change in light except the strobing red of emergency lumens that continued their 3-second cycle regardless of how much time had passed. I counted seconds, then minutes. Then I lost count and started over. Then I lost count again and stopped trying. I talked to the dead, not consciously, not at first. but the silence was worse than the smoke, worse than the heat, worse than the smell of 19 bodies slowly cooking in the confined space of a metal coffin. So I talked. To Bradley, whose intestines had decorated my chest. To Hendricks, whose head had rotated in ways that violated the laws of anatomy. To Whitfield, who had died giving me orders I was not sure I could follow. I told them about my life before the Guard, about the hive city where I grew up, the manufactorum where I worked, the girl I had loved before the conscription notice came. Her name was Sarah. She had worked in the water processing facility on level 47. She had smiled at me once in the transit corridor between shifts, and I had spent the next 3 months trying to work up the courage to speak to her. I never did. The conscription came first. I told the dead about Sarah, about her smile, about the way her hair caught the light from the industrial lumens, about all the words I never said because I thought I would have time to say them later. The dead did not respond, but the talking helped. It filled the silence. It reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of producing sound, still something other than another corpse waiting to rot. The second hour. The fire reached the bulkhead seals. I heard it before I saw it. A hissing, a popping, the sound of chemical retardant failing against sustained heat. Then a crack appeared in the foam, orange light spilling through like the dawn of some terrible sun. Smoke poured through the gap, thick and black and choking, carrying with it temperatures that made my exposed skin prickle with the first warnings of a burn. I used the third canister on the crack. More foam, more hissing. The orange light disappeared behind layers of white, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The fire was patient. The fire had all the time in the world. My skin had started to blister, not badly, not yet. But the ambient temperature in the fighting compartment had climbed to levels that the human body was not designed to tolerate for extended periods. Sweat poured from every inch of me, soaking my uniform, evaporating almost immediately in the dry heat. The water canteens became more precious. I rationed myself to 1 sip every 15 minutes, even though my throat screamed for more, even though my body demanded hydration to replace what it was losing. The bodies were changing. Heat does things to corpses, things I had heard about in morbid conversations during long marches but had never witnessed firsthand. The skin darkens, contracts, pulls away from the underlying tissue. The gases trapped inside begin to expand, creating pressure that has to go somewhere. I heard the first body burst around the 3rd hour, a wet popping sound like a balloon filled with something other than air, followed by a rush of smell so overwhelming that I vomited again, even though there was nothing left in my stomach to expel. I did not look to see which body it was. I did not want to know. The Vox continued to transmit. Static continued to be the only response. I talked to Sarah now, not to the dead, to someone who was still alive somewhere, still breathing, still existing in a world that contained things other than fire and smoke and the slow dissolution of human remains. I told her things I should have said in that transit corridor, about the way she made me feel, about the dreams I had where we escaped the hive together, found a world with clean air and open spaces, built something that mattered. I knew she could not hear me. I knew the Vox was not connected to anything that would reach her, but the talking helped and I needed help. 4th hour. The heat had become pain, not localized pain, not the sharp, specific hurt of injury, a general pain that inhabited my entire body, a persistent burning that did not stop because there was no cool air to provide relief. My uniform had dried completely. My skin had cracked in places where the sweat had evaporated too quickly, leaving raw patches that wept clear fluid when I moved. The blisters on my hands had grown and burst and formed again. I had stopped counting the bodies that had ruptured. The smell had reached a point where it existed as a physical presence, a weight in the air that pressed against me from all sides. No amount of cloth over my face could filter it. The taste lived on my tongue. It coated my throat. When I swallowed death. When I breathed the men I had served beside for 8 months. The fire had breached the bulkhead in 3 places. Orange light flickered through the gaps, casting shadows that danced across. The ceiling like demons celebrating their feast. The chemical retardant had failed. There was nothing left to apply. The flames would spread until they reached the ammunition stores, and then there would be a brief moment of extraordinary light followed by nothing at all. Except the ammunition stores were supposed to have emergency seals, blast doors designed to contain detonations to prevent the chain reaction that would destroy the entire vehicle. If those seals held, the fire might burn without reaching the shells. The promethium might exhaust itself before breaching the final barriers. I found myself praying, not consciously. The words simply emerged, fragments of catechism I had learned in basic training, invocations to the Emperor that I had recited without believing, but now repeated with something that might have been faith or might have been desperation, but felt the same in the end. God, Emperor of mankind, guardian of humanity, hear your servant in his hour of need. Grant me the strength to endure. Grant me the wisdom to survive. Grant me one more hour, one more minute, one more breath. The Emperor did not respond, but neither did the ammunition detonate. 5th hour, something moved. I was hallucinating by then. I knew that. The combination of heat, dehydration, smoke inhalation, and psychological trauma had pushed my brain past the limits of reliable perception. Shadows became shapes. Shapes became figures. Figures became the dead rising from their seats to stand over me with accusation in their eyes, demanding to know why I had survived when they had not. But this movement was different. This movement was real. One of the bodies at the far end of the compartment had shifted, slid, fallen from its position against the wall, and tumbled across the tilted deck. I watched it roll toward me, arms and legs flopping with the boneless grace of things that no longer had the structure to resist gravity. It came to rest against my leg, face pressed into my thigh, mouth open as if about to speak. I screamed. Not words, just sound. Raw terror expelled from lungs that could barely draw enough oxygen to function. I kicked at the body, scrambling backward, my dead arm flopping uselessly at my side while my functional hand clawed at the deck plating for purchase. The body did not pursue. It was not alive. It had simply moved because the fire had weakened whatever was holding it in place, and physics had done the rest. But for a moment, for one terrible moment, I lay there gasping, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heartbeat and wondering when it would stop. The dead man's face still pressed against my leg. I did not have the strength to move it. Hour 6, the jamming stopped. I almost missed it. The change was subtle, a shift in the quality of the static, from random noise to structured patterns, from chaos to order. Voices emerged from the white, fragments of communication, commands, coordinates. The battle was still happening, but the orbital support phase had ended, and the ground forces were being allowed to coordinate again. I grabbed the Vox. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. This is Loader 3rd Class Fitzgerald, Super Heavy Hammer of Retribution. Grid reference 773/419. Vehicle disabled. Fire in progress. I am the only survivor. Repeat, I am the only survivor. Request immediate recovery. Static. Voices, more static. Then Fitzgerald, this is Recovery 7. We have your position. Status of vehicle. I laughed, or sobbed. The sound was somewhere between the two. Hull intact, tracks destroyed. Engine compartment fully involved, fire spreading to fighting positions. Ammunition seals holding, but I don't know for how long. A pause, too long. I could hear other conversations on the channel, overlapping transmissions from a dozen units all competing for attention. Recovery crews were scarce, disabled vehicles were not. Fitzgerald, Recovery 7. Be advised, current combat intensity precludes immediate extraction. Earliest possible response is 4 hours. Can you hold 4 hours? 4 hours. The fire was already in the compartment with me. The temperature was already past what the human body could tolerate. 4 hours might as well be 4 centuries. I'll hold, I said, because there was no other answer. Copy that, Fitzgerald. Mark your position for retrieval. Recovery 7 out. The channel went silent. 4 hours. I had to survive 4 more hours. Hour 7. The ammunition seals failed, not catastrophically. The blast doors held, containing the initial detonation to the primary magazine. but the secondary magazine, the one that fed the sponson weapons, had been damaged in the original strike. The seals there were compromised. The fire found its way through. The first shell cooked off with a sound like the world ending. The concussion threw me across the compartment, over bodies and wreckage, into the far wall with force that drove the air from my lungs and left stars dancing in my vision. Something cracked in my chest, ribs probably. The pain was distant, muted by the general suffering that had become my baseline existence. More shells detonated, one after another, the sponson magazines emptying themselves in a chain reaction that shook the entire vehicle like a dying animal thrashing in its death throes. The hull buckled, metal screamed. Something gave way on the port side, and suddenly there was light, not firelight, actual light. Grey and dim, filtered through smoke and debris, but unmistakably the light of the outside world. A hole had opened in the sponson, a gap where the ammunition explosion had blown outward instead of inward, tearing through the already weakened armor and creating an opening perhaps half a meter across. I could escape. The realization hit me with the force of another explosion. I could fit through that hole. I could crawl out of this coffin. I did not have to wait 4 hours for recovery crews who might never come. I started moving, over bodies, through wreckage, toward the light. The fire followed me. It had spread throughout the fighting compartment now, feeding on fabric and flesh and the ancient lubricants that kept the weapons functioning. The heat was beyond anything I had experienced, beyond anything I had imagined possible while remaining conscious. My uniform smoldered. My hair began to crisp. The skin on my face tightened and split, and I could feel blood running down my cheeks like tears. I reached the hole. The edges were sharp, twisted metal that would cut me to ribbons if I was not careful. But careful was a luxury I no longer possessed. I shoved my functional arm through first, feeling the metal slice into my skin, feeling the blood flow hot and immediate. Then my head, my shoulders. The gap was tight, too tight. I could not fit. I pushed harder. Something tore, my uniform, my flesh. I did not care. The light was there, just beyond the barrier, just past the razor edges that were peeling me open like a fruit. I screamed and kept pushing, and felt my ribs crack where the broken ones could not handle the pressure, and still I pushed, because the alternative was burning, and I had promised Whitfield I would survive. The metal gave way. Not much, a centimeter, maybe 2, but enough. I felt my torso slide through, felt the sharp edges rake across my back like claws, felt myself falling forward into air that was hot but not as hot, into light that was dim but not as dim, into a world that existed outside the coffin. I fell 2 meters and landed on ash. The battlefield stretched around me, craters, wreckage, bodies that belonged to other vehicles, other crews, other men who had died serving the Emperor in this pointless engagement. The sky was grey with smoke, and the thunder of distant artillery continued unabated, and somewhere a voice was shouting coordinates that had nothing to do with me. I lay in the ash and looked up at the hole I had crawled through. Fire poured from it now. The tank was fully involved, flames consuming everything inside, erasing the evidence of 19 lives that had ended in violence and then been desecrated by heat. The men I had served with, the friends I had made, the jokes I had heard and the fears I had shared and the small human moments that made service bearable, all of it burning. The 8th hour never happened. Recovery 7 found me 40 minutes later, unconscious from blood loss and smoke inhalation and the accumulated trauma of everything I had experienced. They told me afterward that my heart had stopped twice during transport to the field hospital. They told me I was lucky to be alive. They told me the Emperor must have plans for me, that survival against such odds was surely a sign of divine favor. I did not feel favored. I did not feel lucky. I felt empty, carved out from the inside, a shell of a man whose contents had burned away in a metal coffin while 19 corpses kept him company. They gave me a new arm, augmetic, better than the original in every measurable way, stronger, more precise, completely without sensation. They gave me a medal. Survivor's Commendation. 3rd class, the same rank as the position I had held when everything burned. They gave me new orders, reassignment to another super heavy, another crew, another 20 men who would learn my name and tell me jokes and show me pictures of the people they loved. The transport carried me away from the field hospital on a grey morning that smelled like nothing at all. I sat in the hold with the other replacements, men who had their own stories of survival and loss, men who did not ask about the burns that still covered my face, or the way my augmetic hand trembled when I was not consciously controlling it. We were all meat for the machine now, components to be inserted where other components had failed. The Imperium did not mourn its dead, it simply replaced them. I thought about Sarah as the transport lifted into the grey sky, about her smile, about all the words I never said. The new orders said I would be operational within the week. I did not know if I would survive the next engagement. I did not know if survival even mattered anymore. But I knew I would climb into another tank, load another shell, serve another sergeant who would give me orders I might not be able to follow. The Emperor protects. That was what they told us. That was what we were supposed to believe. But in a burning coffin surrounded by 19 dead men, I had learned what the Emperor really did. He watched. The transport shuddered as it broke through the cloud layer, and I closed my eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be someone who had never burned. I could not. The memories of before had started to blur, fading at the edges like photographs left too long in the sun. Sarah's face, my mother's voice, the sound of rain on Militarum windows, all of it dissolving, replaced by the smell of cooking flesh and the taste of smoke and the endless red strobe of emergency lumens painting the dead in increments. The new crew would not know what I had been through. The paperwork would list my previous assignment, my commendation, my augmetic replacement. It would not list the hours, it would not list the names. Whitfield, Bradley, Hendricks, Webb, Patterson, Cooper, the Vasquez brothers. Chen and Morrison fused together in death as they had never been in life. I said their names under my breath, a prayer, a memorial, a promise that someone would remember even if the records did not. The transport droned on toward a future I could not imagine wanting. Somewhere below, on a battlefield I would never see again, the wreckage of Hammer of Retribution continued to smolder. The bodies inside had long since been reduced to ash and carbon, indistinguishable from the metal that had contained them. There would be no recovery, no burial, no markers to indicate that 20 men had lived and fought and died in that location. The Imperium had already forgotten them. I had not. The new tank was called something else, a different name, a different number, a different machine spirit that would require different rituals to appease. But it would feel the same, the cramped spaces, the recycled air, the knowledge that any moment could bring the fire that ended everything. I would climb inside anyway, because that was what guardsmen did. We climbed into coffins and waited to burn. The sergeant who greeted me at the new posting had a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen more than they should have. He looked at my augmetic arm, looked at my burned face, looked at the metal pinned to my chest. He did not ask what had happened. He simply handed me a loading mechanism and pointed to my station. I took my place among the living, surrounded by men who did not yet know they were already dead. The engine roared to life. We rolled toward the front. And somewhere inside me, in the place where fear used to live, there was only the memory of flames.